And hello, and welcome to our special report about the 2020 election. I'm Loney. Over the next 40 minutes or so, we're going to be discussing the impact of the presidential election on a variety of different sectors and components that are being talked about a great deal today. Everything from the state of the economy to racial inequality to the state of small business and more. Joining us for our discussion today are Tom Steyer, hedge fund manager, philanthropist, environmentalist. Steyer was among the candidates for the Democratic nomination for earlier this year. Also with us, Charles Payne, host of Making Money with Charles Payne, weekdays on the Fox Business Network. He's also a Wall Street analyst and author of the book Unstoppable Prosperity. Gentlemen, thanks very much for your time and greatly appreciate you joining us today.
Thank you.
Great to be with you, Dan.
Thank you both. Let's start out with where we are right now with COVID. And obviously that is having an impact on so many different aspects of business in the country right now. The element of the medical side is obviously having an impact on the business side. And Charles, I'll start with you and give us your thoughts on how things have kind of laid out, especially over the last month or two as the U.S. economy is trying to recover.
Well, I think certainly we've seen a major sea shift in the notion that the only way to fight COVID is to hunker down, shut down the entire economy, and try to come back out when the coast is clear. In part because we don't know when the coast is clear, and when we come back out, it may look like the end of a nuclear war or something. The economic damage we're still trying to sift through since then has been unfathomable. So I think the idea now is, yes, we have cases that are going up. Testing obviously is going up a lot. The good news is that death rates are going down and positive rates are going down. I've always felt from the very beginning we would have to learn how to live with the pandemic, looking back at the Spanish flu and how long it took then for society to deal with it. So I think there's a different sort of thinking out there. Anecdotally, I've tried to go to some restaurants and malls. You can see people want to get back to some sense of normalcy. Certainly businesses need it, particularly small businesses. So there's definitely a shift in thinking. Also, if you look at the economic impact, the states that opened early, while they were criticized and there were spikes in cases, they also enjoyed the lowest unemployment rates, from Montana, Georgia, those kind of states, which normally, by the way, don't have the lowest unemployment rates. And the highest would be Hawaii, California, New York, Illinois, Michigan, those places that still have pretty draconian measures compared to their other brethren, their other states out there.
Tom, how have you viewed this?
Well, Dan, I think it's very clear that, in fact, this administration has had no coordinated plan in response to the COVID pandemic. And in fact, has tried to pretend it isn't even really happening and to downplay it. And I think what we know is that to have the best recovery, we need to get the virus under control. And I think this is an example, one of the many crises facing America, where the differences between the two candidates for president are so vast. Because in Vice President Obama, you have somebody who listens to experts, who believes in science, who would have a coordinated response to this pandemic and to the economic slowdown as a result of it. And I think that in addition, you have somebody who clearly cares about the American people. I mean, if there's one thing you can say about Joe Biden is he's driven by his compassion and caring for the American people. So if you look at what happened in the Obama-Biden administration under similar situations, they had a plan, they followed the experts, they in fact went according to science, and they controlled things. And that is exactly what they would do now. And honestly, it's compared to an administration that really has never had a plan and has been unable to formulate any coordinated response and has basically said, it's up to you, governors of the states, to try and deal with this individually. And if you look around the world, that's why the United States has been a glaring example of a failed response to this pandemic, because in effect, we haven't had a coordinated response. So I look at this as, emblematic of the failure of this administration to deal with a crisis It isn't like they mishandled it. They refused to handle it.
I just would like to say, I mean, a lot of those are talking points that have expired. If you look today, Europe has more cases than the United States. Dummy United States, which handled it all wrong. Europe is skyrocketing through the roof. Our economy has come back better. Operation Warp Speed ensures that we will have a vaccine in a record amount of time. The federal government stepped up to build hospitals, to move in ships, to convert other things. They did an amazing job for governors who, by the way, who complained about certain things and then didn't even use the resources when they were made available. The Obama Biden administration was lucky the H1N1 did not have the same characteristics as this, because it would have been a whole lot different. In fact, no nation was completely, quote unquote, prepared for something that has not happened in anyone's lifetime. The last time this happened was a century ago. That being said, you know, unless you lived in a place where you have dictatorial rule, you know, a country like America, which prides itself on individual freedoms, maybe it could be a double-edged sword, maybe not, but it did get us to this place where we are #1 in the world. So if you wanted more of a dictatorial federal response, then that's
Charles,
not the country we live in.
Charles, let me just say, we're talking about an administration that denied that masks work and that specifically led a political movement to prevent Americans from protecting each other by wearing masks.
No one
You're
prevented
talking,
anyone from wearing
please,
masks.
I let you speak. Please let me speak. You're talking about a president who yesterday said that CNN should stop covering the COVID pandemic because it doesn't matter. And you're talking about a president who actually led a series of political gatherings that were super spreader events in his own administration. So in fact, if what a president does and what Joe Biden stands for, honestly, is caring about the American people. He's been wearing a mask the whole time. If you look at the values, the president's behavior really matters.
Oh,
And
yeah,
who
sure it
you
does.
are and how you care about it. Look, the two things you know about Joe Biden, which are completely different from the current president, are he really cares about the American people. And he has said across the board, if you look at all of his policies and plans, they start with working families, working people, jobs, and good paying union jobs.
Yeah.
And you can look at this pandemic and it's exactly the same thing. It's compassion and caring and jobs.
Working families cannot afford to stay in their basement all day long with the mask on. Their mommy and daddy has to go to work. So if you shut down their economy like Biden wants to, then mommy and daddy are no longer working families. If you don't open the schools and mommy can't go to work, mommy and daddy are no longer working families.
Right.
I can't vouch for how much Biden cares about the country. That is a soundbite. As an African American, a black man, I can tell you right now, he had put a lot of my brethren in prison with his crime bill that I don't think he cares at all. When he thinks that black kids are marveling at his blonde curly hair at the swimming pool and he intimidated popcorn or corn pop, I don't know how much he cares. That's a good soundbite. And some people are buying it. I'm not buying it. So I try to go with all the facts instead of personality. And what I will tell you is that this economy has come back faster than anyone thought it would. We are doing extraordinarily better than anyone thought we would. And by the way, a lot of places in the world are grappling with COVID more than we are at this point.
So let me jump in here and switch this a little bit, because within the scope of the pandemic is also, as Charles just alluded to, is the issue of jobs and bringing as many people back to work. We know that obviously some companies are going to, not be in existence. They aren't already. We know that some companies are going to be bringing people back over the next few months. So Tom, I'll start with you. The idea of rebuilding this economy really has to start with being able to find as many jobs and getting as many people back to work as you can in the next several weeks and months.
So Dan, let's talk about what Joe Biden is really proposing for America. Let's actually look at it. And one of the things he's proposing is the Build Back Better plan. It's a $2 trillion clean energy infrastructure program in the first 4 years of a Biden-Harris administration. And what that looks like is rebuilding the infrastructure of America, which we all know needs to be rebuilt, and this is overdue, in a way that creates the opportunity for American business to build clean energy jobs and for us to move to respond to our climate crisis. But let's just put this in a job crisis, in a job context, because this isn't just a climate plan, although it is a necessary and aggressive climate plan. It also will create millions of good paying union jobs across this country. Because if you're going to weatherize the housing stock, if you're going to build charging stations, if you're going to build rail, if you're going to rebuild the grid, if you're going to close the digital divide, if you're going to spend $2 trillion, you're going to create millions of good paying union jobs across this country. But it isn't just that. It also specifically addresses some of the systemic racism in our country in the way that it's designed. So it very specifically addresses environmental justice or injustice by dealing with cleaning up the air pollution, the water pollution, and the toxicity that exists around the United States and is concentrated in underserved Black and brown communities. And it specifically addresses job creation in those communities by pointing to 40% of the jobs to be aimed to be created right there. So if you look at this COVID slowdown, the slowdown associated with COVID, and you look at the very, very high unemployment, this is a plan to do exactly what government is supposed to do, which is to step up on behalf of the American people when you're in a crisis and to act to create jobs. And this is a plan which is a win-win-win for the American people.
So Charles, let me have you respond to that, but also from the perspective of what a second Trump administration would have to look like in terms of the economy in the second 4 years.
Well, I will go with the first three before the pandemic hit. And the first three we saw Hispanic and Black wealth surge in a way that it never surged before. It was 60% for Hispanics, over 30% for Blacks. At the same period, 2% for whites. Poverty dropped in 2019. Poverty for Black Americans was at the all-time low. All-time low, dropped 2.2 percentage points in 3 years. Over 8 years of Obama Biden, tried 0.5%. 8 years. 8 years. Home ownership at this very moment for Black Americans, the highest since the third quarter of 2008. For Hispanics, the highest ever. Business startups are exploding at a pace right now we have not seen in dozens of years. As far as environmental justice and racial justice, it breaks my heart to know what my grandparents went through, what their grandparents went through, and to see it hijacked in the name of for environmentalists to hijack the pain and suffering of Black people to forward their agenda should be criminal, should be outlawed. It's despicable. They are not intertwined. You can try to make them intertwined. It's two different things. My grandparents had a farm in Uniontown, Alabama, no running water. My grandmother never slept with a pillow. She slept with her arms crossed so she can hear out for the Ku Klux Klan. Don't steal that to push your environmental policies. You got a lot of other spills and a lot of other things you want to sell, great. Don't use the guise of racial justice for that because it is despicable. As far as racial justice, let's begin in the major cities where income inequality, for instance, in New York City between Black women and white men is higher than anywhere else in this country. So I'm all for it. I don't know why any of these jobs, by the way, have to be union jobs. And I will also say that under Obama, we did a lot of these things. And what you would get, let's just say at the largest solar farms, some of these gigantic solar farms where they killed all the indigenous animals and the sunlight killed all the birds that flew over. Forget about that part that used to hold up oil pipelines, right? We look at the migration patterns of a salamander and hold up a oil pipeline for decades. The thing is, you would get some construction jobs initially. And you would go to the website, read it, okay, 300 construction jobs. But once it was completed, you had 5 jobs to operate it. I mean, there's got to be a selling point anyway, if ultimately it's going to be cheaper. You know, I did a 25-page report over the weekend on what people should own for the election, depending on who wins. Next Era is the one you would own under Biden. They got 3, they got so many breaks, so many subsidies from the American taxpayer. And it's so ironic because that one company got more than ExxonMobil ever got combined. And fortunately now for them, they got a market cap bigger than ExxonMobil. So yeah, let's fix the infrastructure. Let's do all of those things. But I mean, I'd love to try to propose and sell these things without having to hijack the pain and suffering of Black people in this country, because it's not tied into so-called environmental justice.
So let me just address that, Dan. First, let's talk about job creation in the Obama-Biden administration, 8 years, where they created 12 million jobs. And let's talk about job creation in the Trump administration, not in the first 3 years of the Trump administration, but the whole Trump administration, where they have destroyed 4 million jobs. So let's actually go to the historical record, because those are the facts. Let's talk a little bit more about really what this Biden Build Back Better plan does. And let's talk about the market, and let's talk about how America is going to succeed, not in the past, not looking backwards, but actually in the future. And really what this plan does is what government's supposed to do, which is to provide a framework and an infrastructure for American business to succeed. Exactly what the Republican Party loves to talk about doing is what the Biden Build Back Better plan does, which is enables American companies, American workers to create the businesses and the products of the future, so that in fact, we have the growth and the job creation that we all want. But let me make one more point, which is this. There's an assumption in the media that in fact, the environmentalists in the United States are white people. And in fact, anyone who examines this will understand, and if you poll it, and if you go around, you will see that in fact, the way that people break down in terms of environmentalism is very different from what the media portrays. And the answer is the people who care the most, vote the most, and I've run multiple campaigns on this and won. You start with Latinos. The number two group who care about clean energy, environmentalism, climate are African Americans. The number three group is Asian Americans. So when we talk about where leadership comes from in this movement, in fact, that is actually where leadership comes from. And in fact, that's where the environmental movement is centered. So in fact, the way that the Biden plan works is a win-win-win of addressing climate, but absolutely starts and is based in environmental justice and in people from those communities and leaders from those communities. And in fact, it also, the reason this coalition, let me just finish. The reason there's such a strong coalition, a unique coalition behind the Biden-Harris ticket is because, in fact, it does address across the board. That's why union leaders are lining up behind Joe Biden. The head of the biggest energy union in the country, the International Brotherhood of Electric Workers, Loney Stevenson, is a very strong supporter of this ticket and this plan because he believes that there will be a lot of jobs created across the country for this. And that's exactly what it should be. So we're seeing something completely different here, which is a broad-based, market-driven movement with government doing its proper function of standing up for American working people and American business so that in the future products are created here and the future industries are created here. Right. And the jobs come to the United States, not to China. We're not giving the future away to the rest of the world. We are creating it here with our ingenuity and our entrepreneurship and the hard work of American workers across this country.
Charles, I know you want to jump in, and then I have a point to bring up afterwards. Go ahead.
I don't even know where to begin. Obama and Biden almost gave the entire country away to China while they were in office. They never did too much complaining. They didn't do any pushback. They didn't fight. They didn't do anything for the American people. As far as businesses are concerned, government is concerned, the best thing they can do is create a backdrop so that people can succeed. And when you take all the money out of the private industry, when you hike taxes, when you increase regulations, and under the guise, by the way, in the political campaign of punishing rich people, Ultimately, you punish people who try to create businesses. You limit their opportunities. This is just proven facts. I mean, Tom knows this stuff. So it's and when I go to the South Bronx and I'm hanging out with my wife's family and my godson and these people, they want real legitimate opportunities. And by the way, it begins with real legitimate educations. And if Democrats really wanted to help Black people in these major cities and states where they control education, stop giving us watered down educations. Have enough confidence in my grandchildren that they're not so dumb that you give them these educations in kindergarten so that by the time they graduate from high school, they're not ready to compete against other people. Please do that while you're at it. If you really want to help Black people, treat them with the same dignity and respect, and believe it or not, treat them as if they're intellectually equal or superior to whites. And this way, you don't have to worry about talking about higher minimum wage. You don't have to worry about Section 8 housing. You don't have to worry about income inequality. They can compete and without any of these other things to make up for it.
Well, let me just get back to something that I think is going on in the real world and talk about what we're seeing. And this is something where the market is confirming what I'm saying. The market and Americans. And so let's just take a look at what this looked like. And Charles mentioned that NextEra, which is predominantly a collection of clean energy businesses, has a higher market capitalization than ExxonMobil, which is interesting in and of itself because most Americans have not heard of NextEra and have definitely heard of ExxonMobil. But what you should know is, and I went back and checked, the ExxonMobil stock price peaked in 2007. So over the next 13 years, not only have you lost money in ExxonMobil, but you have not made money by owning companies that are pointed towards the future. And that may seem like a single statistic, but it actually reflects the objective profit-seeing opinions of investors around the world. And so you can see in the last month, JP Morgan, which has traditionally been a big energy lender, particularly in frontier developments, say that they're going to run their loan book according to the Paris Accords. You saw another huge international bank, Hong Kong and Shanghai, say that they were going to lend $1 trillion to their clients in the next 10 years to prepare them for a net zero carbon emission world. You can see people across the board in the private world who come to me and say, I want to take advantage of what I can see is happening in clean energy to start companies, to build businesses going forward in America,
right,
to build this clean energy future. And so what we're seeing in my mind in this is the result of American research and ingenuity. And you can see that what's happened is the lines have crossed on cost. That in fact, wind is cheaper than fossil fuels in terms of electricity generation. Solar is cheaper than fossil fuels. And so we're seeing this in the real world. We're seeing it in red states and blue states. The market is making a point. The market looks forward. And the market is telling you that what Joe Biden is proposing is sensible and is real world and is actually what is going to let American business create jobs and products. So we're seeing something, it's sort of funny that the Republicans would be, talk so much about business and so much about all these things, when in fact, what Joe Biden is talking about, which is standing up for the American people, standing up for American workers, standing up for the American future, is exactly in line with both what the market is saying. And they did a poll to compare the Biden energy plan with the Trump energy plan. And 66% of Americans went with Biden and 26% went with Trump. The American people and the markets of the world are telling you, this is our future. This is how we're going to compete and succeed in our country and create good paying jobs across this country for working people.
So let me throw this to you, Charles, because if you're talking about energy, I think there is really there's not a big understanding that we're going to have oil as a component one way or the other for a long time to come. There may be, as Tom lays out, the addition of solar and nuclear may be coming back, for various elements. it makes me wonder if there can be kind of a middle ground here where the traditional oil companies can start to even make a, dip their toes even more. We've heard recently about, more M&A in the energy sector, ConocoPhillips buying Concho just the
Right.
other day, of whether or not there can be this kind of middle ground for a lot of these traditional energy companies where they can still be able to, advance and use oil as a component, but still be able to make that next step as well.
I agree with you there, Dan. And I would say the folks who ran ExxonMobil didn't put a finger in the air, didn't judge, because all those stats that Tom were reading off to you, they aren't market-driven forces. Those are government-driven forces. And I can tell you right now, in addition to hosting my show, I have a stock market research firm, and I'm great. I'm really great when it comes to picking winning stocks. And one of the things I had to come to terms with myself is that although I was offended over the last 24 months, every time I would see, these government mandates, and it was pretty clear that around the world, governments are going to force people into certain choices. And one of those choices will be solar, wind, electric vehicles. And you can't beat these governments. Not even the oil company at its mightiest point could beat these companies. NextEra got $3 trillion in subsidies, loans, loan guarantees. Of course, the stock went through the roof. It was $50 the day Obama was inaugurated. It's $310 a day. If I gave you $3 trillion, Dan, your stock would go through the roof, my man. You would be the baddest stock in the market. So yes, that's where the governments are going. I don't like it. I think it should be market driven. If it was market driven, we might get there. But let's not forget, in 1900, there were three forms of automobiles, right?
Yeah.
Combustion engine, gasoline, and electric. Guess what was number 3 in terms of market share? Gasoline. Guess what was number 1? Electric. We've been here before. Consumers made the choice, but this time governments are making a choice.
So
let's just talk honestly.
Go ahead, Tom.
I've got to break in, Dan.
Yep.
Because first of all, I spent 30 years in the private sector as an investor. I think I understand. I built an investment business from scratch. I think I understand a little bit about what it takes to invest and make money.
Where'd you make most of the money, my man? Come on.
I made most of my money, not in what you're going to say.
Enough.
No, in fact, I invested in every part of the economy, and we did well in every part of the economy, and we invested less than the percentage. We invested in fossil fuels, and I stopped, and that's why I left the investment business. So no one would ever claim that what I had done, that what I was doing had anything to do with making money. It's just about what's right. And that's what's missing from what you're talking about, which is this. There is information coming from the natural world to the people of the United States and the people of the world. And that says we have an urgent climate crisis. And it's not a question, this is not a question that is open to debate, although the Republican Party refuses to accept it. We can see the information coming every single day from the natural world that says, not only is it smart to move this way in terms of jobs, it's necessary to move this way. And the Biden plan addresses a climate crisis that is facing Americans, and we're living it. I live in California. We have record fires. We have record numbers of storms in the Gulf. The second biggest disaster this year in America was the hurricane in Iowa, the derecho that destroyed soybeans and corn crops. So one of the things that's going on is we need the government to respond to this crisis effectively and in a way that protects Americans. And the fact that Joe Biden is responding in his plans reflects something which is important, which is he actually cares about the safety and health of Americans. He actually does care about clean air and clean water and kids who have asthma. He actually does want this country to put ourselves in a position so that we aren't in this increasing spiral of climate-related disasters. And so any plan, any government that refuses to address an absolutely life or death crisis for its people does not deserve to remain in power. And that's exactly what we have now.
Well,
and the difference between these two candidates could not be bigger.
So
in the meantime,
the crisis
Dan,
could not be more urgent.
In the
And that's
meantime,
exactly why this
in
election
the
is going to
meantime,
be generational.
CO2 levels in the United States declined more in our country last year than European countries and all of these other countries that signed the Paris Accord. Over what, 13% decline? And how can you explain that? And we weren't in the Paris Accord, because if there's a natural way of achieving these things, and by the way, you know, there are scientists who have studied patterns and don't agree. There's not a universal agreement.
Send me one.
And all I'm saying is that we are already bringing down CO2 levels without hamstringing our economy, without hijacking the economy, and by the way, without letting China run rampant. Imagine Joe Biden saying, China, take the next 20 years and blow it up while we handcuff our businesses to the Paris Climate Accord.
That's hilarious. That's hilarious, because in fact, what's happening is a number of governors, including the governor of California, a number of municipalities are in the "we're still in" movement, and they're living up to the Paris Accords. So to hear a president who has denied climate on TV, who has done everything he can to make sure that we don't respond to the crisis, doesn't even acknowledge the crisis, and there's a direct parallel to how he's responded to the COVID pandemic. For him to take credit for the changes that have gone on across this country in states where the governors, mayors, and municipalities have chosen to put in rules for how energy is generated and used, means that he now wants to take credit as a climate denier. He wants to take credit for reductions in CO2 that are being mandated by people who he mocks and pretends have no right.
That is a hilarious natural gas. Actually, the oil and gas industry
by a president.
The oil and gas industry should take credit.
Doesn't care.
The natural gas industry should take credit. Fracking should take credit. And by the way, California, I don't know why you think they can have it both ways. They did not have enough energy to help them fight these wildfires. And by the way, forest management would have prevented a lot of it, and so would have stopping these people, the arsonists. I mean, it's the idea that these fires just sparked up all by themselves, and that these brownouts had nothing to do with these flimsy mandates on energy. They made it tougher to survive those fires.
So let me jump in and switch the topics, because we just got a few minutes left, and I wanted to touch on the issue of taxes and small business in the last piece here. Obviously, a lot is being talked about with Joe Biden potentially coming into office of his tax plan. He says taxes on people that are earning $400,000 a year or more. He's talked about a corporate tax increase from 21 to 28%. There's a lot of conversation about what kind of impact that might have, obviously, on people that are making more money, but whether or not there's a downstream impact on this. Tom, I'll start with you. When you look at the Biden tax plan, what do you see? And is there the potential for a downstream impact if companies, if they're going to have to be paying more on the tax side, if they're going to be potentially passing it down the line to the consumer?
Dan, I think it's really important to look at the Biden tax plan in the context of Biden's total plans that include COVID response and the Build Back Better plan. And you don't have to ask me. Moody's did an analysis of the policies that Joe Biden is proposing and said that it will create 18.6 million jobs. So what we see is a tax plan that doesn't raise taxes at all on people who make less than $400,000, that creates literally, I don't know that 18.6 is the right number, but you have somebody who's saying this is a gigantic job creation plan in total. Yeah. Which is exactly what is needed right now, because we have really high unemployment. And you have a president, or you would have a President Biden, assuming he wins, who is going to put working people, working families first. Charles, and so you have somebody who's fact-driven, science-driven, and really compassion-driven and cares about the American people, who's going to be putting forward plans on our behalf at a time when we're in overlapping crises, multiple crises, either created or exacerbated by this administration. Charles, the choice is dramatically different. The values are dramatically different And I think Americans are going to show up in historic numbers, highest ever, and really make a decision here between two completely different approaches to what is supposed to happen.
I agree. It'll be the highest ever, and it's a stark choices. I disagree that President Trump started the COVID-19 crisis. But having said that, since Moody's analysis, which by the way, let's admit Mark Zandi is something somewhat to the left. He's a brilliant guy, but he is far to the left. Last week on Thursday, the Urban Brookings Institute, which is a left-leaning organization, also said that Biden's taxes, because of all of the promises he has made on the campaign trail, they modeled it and they came up with $4 trillion in March, Dan. They went back and they redid the math, and it will only raise 2.4 trillion. Why is that important? Well, he's going to have to come up with more money to keep those promises. And that means either higher corporate taxes or other taxes. And then, of course, there's a report out of the Hoover Institute that says ultimately the median household income in this country by 2030 will be down $6,500. Imagine what that means for the average American family.
Yep.
That is disastrous. It's heartbreaking disastrous. Tom, the other thing I would say is, it's good to always use the terms working families and unions and all of that, but what about the notion of an opportunity, really just, again, and I look at the amounts of businesses that are being created at this very moment, for people to really climb up the economic ladder, to really get rich, to be the next Tom Steyer. I don't think that can happen, or it's a lot harder to happen when you cut off capital, when you punish success. And listen, I know you're a rap fan. You probably saw what 50 Cent had to say. He said, I'm voting for Trump. He's like, I can't do it. I came out the ghetto. I made it on an album called Get Rich or Die Trying. And then I lost it and made it back. So you're going to take 62% from me now, and the rest when I die. So I just think if we do want Americans to have upside potential, upside success, you can say what you want about President Trump's tweets, his personality, but the economic agenda, I think, is better for the American people.
I gotta be honest, I never figured in talking with you two gentlemen that 50 Cent would be coming up in this conversation. But honestly, I want to thank you both, Tom and Charles, for giving us this time today. Great to have you both here on Wharton Business Daily on Sirius XM 132. And we look forward to having you back again at another time. All the best to you both.
Thank you very much. Thanks a lot, Tom.
Nice
Thank
to
you
see
both. Tom Steyer and
Thank you.
Charles Payne joining us here on the show. Many thanks to our entire crew at Sirius XM and at the Wharton School for helping us put this all together. Enjoy your day, and we'll talk to you tomorrow.